Hello and welcome to Philosotalks. I'm your host, Chase, and today we have on Cleburn Walker. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too. Yeah, you are definitely someone I've been wanting to talk to after seeing some of your interviews and podcasts recently. And I also saw that you have a book that just came out called Ascension.
Correct.
How's that?
It just came out a little over a week ago, maybe almost 2 weeks ago. I haven't even started promoting it on my actual pages. I just let a couple people know and then shared in my Instagram stories when people tagged me when they posted their copies and stuff. But it's off to a great start for a book that I haven't really begun sharing.
Yeah.
It just now released in the system for me to record the audio version, so it will be available on iTunes and Audible. But that'll be up within the next week. But the book itself, I don't really want to promote it. I definitely don't want to talk too much about it because it's not for everybody. The people who it's for will kind of know it. They'll feel it. They'll resonate with it. It's called Ascension: Knowing God in You, Removing the Veil to Source and Activating the Christos Within. So it's very short in words, but they're kind of coded. They're kind of layered. So you could read the whole book in 35, 40 minutes, or you could read a few pages at a time and let them kind of integrate and do their thing, sort of blossom in you. But it's written in a way where it has nothing to do with me. There's no Cleburn Walker in this book. There's no personal anecdotes. There's no stories or personal recommendations. It's just some truth that I was given that is really more than one book, but I ended up needing at the last minute to release it in a series. And they pull people through a sequence of alignments, a sequence of quick revelations and awarenesses to pull people into an inner truth, an inner knowing, an inner remembrance, which is why I say this book isn't for everybody, because a lot of people may read it and take it at face value and like it. But for the people who, the feedback I've been getting is that it is causing some very immediate inner transformation and immediate shifts in perception. So that is the intended audience, the people who are kind of at that point where they're like, they know there's something next that's coming for them. And this book is written by them for them to pull into their experience at this time.
Wow. I love that. Yeah, I've felt that definitely within the last couple years, a certain call, you could say, like the universe calling upon you um, to do your part or to do what you came here to do. And yeah, I hear a lot of people talk about the problems of this world, like, oh man, this world is going to shit. Oh man, look at this problem and that problem. And um, at the same time, you hear other people saying, oh, we live at the best time in human history. We have more, um, wealth and longer life than ever before. So it seems like it depends on how you look at it, but there's definitely a feeling of, there's something wrong here. It's not perfect. We have plenty of work to do, no matter how far we've come. And especially with, everyone says technology is really what's driving forward a lot of advancements. But I guess at the same time, it almost feels like the spiritual aspect of our lives, what's lacking. And in my past, my whole life, I guess I've always felt like the institutions of spirituality have seemed to let us down. And so that's what kind of makes me think like, I need to do something. Like I can't just go to church and be happy with how the church, is the state of the church is right now. So like throughout my whole life, I've definitely went to this church and that church and tried to find community. And it's been hard. It's been hard for sure to find a community.
Um, so I assume by that you may have been raised in a church environment or had been used to it. How long has it been that you have sort of felt like you can't get your cup filled there anymore? How long has that been?
Very long time. So I um, I went to Christian school
Hmm.
between fifth grade and eighth grade,
Hmm.
and it was a Lutheran school, and I went through like this training called confirmation, where
Hmm.
they give you the training and the basics, and it's kind of like the second step after baptism. You get baptized when you're a baby, but the Lutherans believe that the baby can't choose to be a Christian, so they have to be confirmed when they're a
Hmm.
little older. So this confirmation, like process between fifth grade, sixth grade was like foundational for me. That definitely raised Christian and Lutheran, and then I went to a public high school. So then I was quickly shifted into a bigger school, um, full of different perspectives and broadened my horizons, but at the same time cast a light on certain things that were like problematic with like the fundamentalist Christian theology, like namely the idea that the Earth is only a few thousand years old, whereas like scientists believe it's millions and millions of years old. So there was this disconnect on certain topics, and then I went to college and just always felt curious about other world religions, and then the whole question comes up like, why would God choose one religion and then the rest of the religions are wrong?
Right.
That didn't also make sense. So it's been a spiritual journey my whole life.
Yeah. Um, so that is indicative of the life cycle that you're in right now, or the rate at which you're spiritually maturing to be able to have the capacity to hold more truth. Just like this kind of comes up a lot. A lot of the people that have been reaching out to me for one-on-ones and stuff like that are people, regardless of their background, uh, whether it's church or spirituality or other religions. Everybody sort of is in that framework that they start with. They sort of go away from it, and then everybody sort of comes back at this. No, there's sort of an inner harmony somewhere and a truth. And a lot of people are asking me questions about how the Bible is speaking to that in a way that they were previously not taught. Um, so a lot of this truth, this maturing outside of the bounds of a religious construct, is because you're no longer spiritually like a child who's sitting there writing your A's, B's, and C's repetitively all day, right? Like your foundation is set, whether that's because a parent in your lineage might have passed down the genetic code of all their memories that's stored in your DNA of someone who held firm to their faith and stuck within it. Because within all religious faiths, whether Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, they all are instilling a right doctrine of behavior and social etiquette and ethics, right? Like very few people disagree with that. Where they disagree with it is that when people start to make an argument over it and create borders around it and then go to war over it, that's where people lose faith in what was originally taught, which is always love. And it's always a sort of cohesion, and where you can't get along, then leave each other alone. But trying to fight one another over establishing your will onto them, that's certainly not Jesus's message. That's missing the point of the fact that the divinity that's in me is in you. And the moment I think I know better for you, or feel threatened by you and decide to go to war over this or pick an argument over this or any such thing, now I have created division in my consciousness and created limitations. So you are at a place where you spiritually are mature enough to go beyond the previous boundaries, and you can trust yourself to go outside of those bounds without getting lost into depravity or spiritual psychosis. You can say, okay, here is right from wrong effectively, but I have some questions and I want to ask them and I want to pursue them energetically into a deeper, broader knowing of truth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of forced into the world stage because of the internet. So we're all connected across the world. So whereas we could have just stayed within our tribe 100 years ago, we're forced to confront the idea that there's other people out there, other nations, and and other belief systems. And yeah, it's just interesting. I've just been interested in reading the history of the development of spiritual ideas,
Mhm.
and it's just so interesting to hear how these ideas have changed over time, and then yeah, you're right. You come full circle. You come back to your roots, and you can. It's kind of like the hero's journey. You know, you leave, you come back, you see your home for what it really was, and it's almost like once you get an outsider's perspective, you can better understand what you were among the whole time. But I loved when some of the things you were talking about on I think it was Nick Zai's podcast about, Jesus getting his training outside of his hometown as well. It definitely seems like that must have happened because he came back with such revolutionary ideas.
Right.
And I think it even says in the Bible that his parents went to Egypt, when King Herod was coming after all the babies.
Yeah,
So,
right after he was born, and the three wise men, the Magi, which were the premier sect of spirituality and religion at that time, right? So adding them in was sort of like adding clout to the birth of Jesus, that they sought to go confirm the anointing over his life, if you will, what he's supposed to do. And then immediately after that, the following verse is called the flight to Egypt. So that's when the angel visits Joseph again and says, "Hey, the king wants to kill your kid, so take the woman and the baby and go to Egypt like right now." So they left during the night. And then it mentions right after that, there's a verse. It says, "So that prophecy may be fulfilled, that I have called my son out of Egypt." So that's like a big tie-in, right? Like to just mention that the Magi came to confirm who he is, and he's going to go to Egypt, and I'm going to call my son out of Egypt. And that's a recurring theme in the Bible, but that's also a recurring theme globally, to effectively a previous timeline. And this is where we would get into some sort of like slightly broader ranges of consciousness, or how the current plane of time that we're in, this current infinity loop, isn't the only one that has ever existed. At previous times during the Egyptian empire, it was every bit as cosmopolitan as the world is now, but just in a different way, right? Like the technology was different, the social structures were different, but they had the capacity to travel and live lavishly, or live in bondage, and it was all available, all levels of consciousness and all sorts of lifestyles existed just as they do now. And truly, anybody can move through any of those in their lifetime in accordance with their capacity, their intention, or their frequency and divine will. So that is part of Jesus' story. Yeah, he was raised by Essene Jews. His parents were in Egypt, and then once he reached a certain age of maturity, went to go train elsewhere. And then that it mentions also when he went back to Bethlehem, he could do no good works there due to their unbelief. That's also a nod to the African proverb, "Nobody's a prophet in his hometown." Because
yes,
people
exactly.
that knew you when you were a kid, and people have this fixed structure in their mind, this fixed dynamic of who you are, as just a character in their story, and they have a difficult time recognizing the autonomy and real-time evolution in somebody else if they haven't begun to receive that in themselves.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, when you come and talk to your friends or your family, and they remember all of the silly things you did as a kid, and they just associate your whole personality with what you were and not with what you might become.
Yeah.
Unless they have the best hopes for you, and maybe you have family members that are supportive of things you can become, and that's what parents should do. They should hold the highest and best for their kids and hope to guide them to become the best that they can become. But yeah, the whole history of Egypt, where you were getting into, is so great. Like, a bunch of the things that I've been reading about include Hermes Trismegistus coming from Egypt. That's just such a bottomless pit of information that almost nobody that I talk to knows about. But when I get online, I guess because of my algorithm, it's all over the place. Everyone seems to be talking about it online. And I think it's because, when they found the Nag Hammadi library, and these old ancient texts go back, just as far as the books of the Bible. And then also you find that Hermes Trismegistus is in that mosaic in one of those cathedrals in Italy. You can see that some of the ancient Christians held Hermes Trismegistus up to that same level of sainthood of Matthew, Mark, all of these great people, but he just was left out of the Bible for some reason. And
So
I guess
the story of Hermes, like his life in a chronological sense, is almost a copy paste template of the life of Jesus, right? Just way far apart and in different times. And then the Bible referencing the Magi as important people and wise men, and it refers to them as, in three different times it refers to them. One says Magi, one says kings from the east, one says wise men, right? So either way, these are people who aren't just scrubs. These are people that the Bible is saying, hey, they are very well respected. And if you look into who magi are a sect of astrologer priests or practicing magicians. Our word magic literally comes from magi. So that is where our word magic comes from, but it's not like the way Disney has painted it to be. It's something different. It's a more harmonious place of servitude through alignment with God and the natural world. Removing ego and self-service, removing that and stepping more into what is good for the whole. But either way, the Magi were founded by Zoroaster, and his story also is almost identical, like at an age for age level with Jesus, and that was thousands of years before in another part of the world. So these stories that are the same, that are referenced, right? Like the Bible is giving nods to them. It's not trying to delete them. It's not trying to bury them in the sands of history, right? It's giving nods to them for people who are wanting to look deeper. And it's not to say that one is more right or wrong, but right now we live in the year 2024 since when, right? Like since Christ died. So our collective consciousness has somehow subconsciously agreed that we're going to do that. Of all the calendars in the world, we're going to go off of that. We live in the age of Christ consciousness, and we have for a couple of thousand years. That's the ground zero, the crux in the infinity loop that we're currently swirling through, as each of us have our consciousness able to move through and constantly pass through that center point, and it will look different every time we come back to it as we continue evolving and understanding deeper. So our need to look outwardly for answers will have no end, right? Like we can end up going into getting into occults or history throughout the world, or this came up earlier in a call I was on, but you cannot intellectualize your way into God. You can intellectualize your way into a point where you pattern recognize that there is a intelligent force that operates beyond humanity, but it operates with humanity. Once you get to a point where you can accept that truth in a way where it doesn't make you feel crazy, nor will you just forget it and pretend like it was just a dream the moment it's not right in your face. Once it's true and you know there is a God, from that point on, every question you ask, every good or bad thing you think of God, God is just a mirror reflection of your level of consciousness. And no matter where you're at, there is always a God that matches that. If you need to rebel against a higher power, there's an angry God who floods the earth and, firebombs Sodom and Gomorrah. If you're in a place where you have messed up enough to where you're like, I cannot get my life straight, I'm in a terrible place, I'm a drug addict, right? I need a 12-step program because I can't trust myself. Then God is this loving, redeeming figure who's like a stern father that will save you when you're really out of line, but he's holding you accountable for right actions. That's what the religious construct is. It's when somebody doesn't know or knows they can't trust themselves enough to be fully autonomous, because we kind of can't until we get to a point where we reintegrate. And that's what the story of the Bible is. It's the story of the evolution of consciousness from both the mankind level and the God level, mirroring each other until the ego God moves through its behavior patterns, and man moves through its levels of awareness and cooperation with God until they meet in the middle and become one in Jesus. And that's effectively what that story is. And that's the message of that whole thing that has been told throughout history and other places with other figures attached to it, that the peak of consciousness of spirituality is stepping into a oneness with God, where God is moving through us, in us, flowing outwardly, expressing love and servitude to all, because all are animated by God. And it's being willing to hold fast to the surrender to the divine flow, which lets God flow through you, but it also lets you be in alignment to witness your life happen, rather than starting to take the reins and say, you know what, I think something bad's about to happen and I don't want to do it, so I'm going to redirect. Now you're back in the ego. Or, hey, I saw a really cool car drive down the street, right? So now I'm like, I need to have that. Or I'm in a happy relationship and my algorithm showed a picture of a girl in a bikini, and now I'm thinking about other girls, right? Like, so once you start getting anywhere outside of the flow of right now where you're at, you're teetering back into ego territory, which goes back, backwards in evolution, and it puts the gap further between you and God. But the more you can surrender to right now, the more you and God can exist as one in harmony, and there begins to feel like very little separation between the two.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. A couple things that stand out. So the idea of surrendering to the divine path that flows through you almost effortlessly, and the idea of going off the path as leading to sin. I think a lot about the etymology of words and how sin means to miss the mark.
Yeah.
And also, how other religious systems have different ways of describing the same thing, like the Buddhist middle path. Don't stray off this way, don't stray off that way. We all know intrinsically that there is a right path, and you're right. We can't come to that knowledge intellectually. It comes from deep within, like from the heart, and the mind has to make sense of what the heart knows.
Right.
And there, we do have to make a harmony with our thoughts and feelings. And that's maybe what I had felt, as a young person. Sometimes you come across information that is not in harmony with what you feel.
Right.
And that's kind of the superpower we have. It's like our bullshit meter. We can kind of tell when someone's lying, or when someone doesn't know, or they just misunderstand the truth of what really is. And yeah, a lot of the things that you read online, they're not all true. I mean, so much of it is wrong. but we have to have a very good critical eye in order to not believe everything we read online, but to find the things that do make sense, and continually make this framework that we can hold in our mind that makes sense of the world. I think a lot of times the world doesn't make sense, and you need some kind of framework to help you see the world through that helps you make it make sense. What has your how was your process of building a framework? How has that played out in your life?
So some of it is nurture, like the experiences you begin collecting from the moment you're born, that helps shape. And then there's also epigenetic memory. Science has proven there's such thing as hand-me-down trauma. The Bible calls it sins of the father. But effectively tied into the purpose of evolution that we're here to do, you can't really know something, how something feels, until you experience it firsthand. But luckily, the reason me and you don't need to go experience certain extreme things to know whether it's good or bad is because within the memory of our DNA, there are enough generations of people that have done those things. Like you said, like we know right from wrong. If you picture, an early caveman who's like, well, I need to procreate. There's a female. I'm going to, the old image of a guy clubbing the girl and dragging her off by the hair.
Yeah.
Like, so new souls, young humanity, early consciousness didn't really know right from wrong, right? And that's why there would every now and then become pockets of society that were so far gone. The Bible talks about just having to get removed entirely, right? Like there is no coming back from that effectively. But that's, we'll get into that a little bit later. But effectively, the firsthand knowledge of specific things and with the broader energies of good or evil, light or dark, all that kind of stuff, has been experienced enough within the coded memories held in my DNA that lends to an inner voice that pulls me in one way or the other. The first part of my life was a series of things I knew I needed to experience as part of getting to know myself and finding my strengths and weaknesses, proving to myself like things I needed to find out, proving to myself that things that like I couldn't make sense of why so many people would be so fascinated or impressed with certain things in the world. So then I would go do it. But then I'd be like, yeah, this was dumb. This isn't that big of a deal. So now I can check that off my need to know list, right? And then once you get to a certain point of doing things that way, that is sort of the process. Either within you already are enough codes of completion, or within your heart is pulling you in the direction of personal experience to find out, so you can accumulate a complete knowing of all the different energetics through their ways in which they can be experienced. And once you get to a point of full knowing, then you have moved sort of out, not full knowing, but a satisfied level of knowing, to where there's nothing else that really makes you know you have to look into it further. Well, then you sort of graduate to that next level where you have the capacity to hold more spiritual truth. And you eventually clear a point where the ego is no longer the driving force. It's not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's what's driving everything for a while, where you're looking at the world, you're adapting to the world, and you're trying to figure it out. And effectively, at that point, God is speaking to you through the world, until eventually you can handle internalizing everything and making everything integrated within yourself. And at that point, when you move more into alignment, then God begins to speak to the world through you. Because you're moving more in flow with a divine level of knowledge. I'm not as much trying to tap into it on my schedule. I'm not trying to agree with or beat, like win or do anything as it concerns my relation, my distal proximity to the world. That's no longer where I'm at. I'm now like sitting still and inviting God to work in me, work through me, that kind of stuff. And then you begin to harmonize and feel more as one that way. But that only comes after sufficient amount of firsthand knowledge that you either in your personal experience have gone through, or your DNA carries the codes of other people that have done it firsthand.
Yeah, so right. Yeah. The idea of getting to the point, where either you've experienced enough in your life, or you can pull from the past knowledge of your ancestors to have that higher perspective. And that higher perspective is basically how we define God. I always think about how the definition of God, and something that a lot of people will always come back to is a higher power. And this idea of higher goes back, I think, all the way to the earliest humans looking at Earth, and they see the Earth and they see the stars. And so you see the heavens and the earth. And of course, God would be above, because if you have a higher perspective, you can see everything. And I think throughout history, we've had this above and below dichotomy of higher and lower. And the symbolism of above and below, it just permeates everything we say. And there's so much symbolism that we use without even thinking about it, that I wonder also if sometimes if someone has a misunderstanding of the symbolism, that can also lead to an internal disharmony. Like, I just think about people who are confused about the world, if they might not understand some of the symbols, because it's so dense. Like when you said, when some people have to be ready to read your book, or even to read the Bible. The Bible itself is hard to read because it's not only been translated, but it's full of symbols. And that's also been like something I've been studying for the past few years, is what do these symbols, or codes as some people call them, mean, as far as above, below, angels, demons, God. So I guess, what I can come back to as far as the question is like, how is that how you would conceptualize God, or is there a way that you can explain God?
So even if I were to explain it, which I'm about to give my explanation, but as I were to explain it, somebody can only hold in their mind an image of God that is a reflection of their present level of consciousness, and their present energetic state. And the Bible is 100% very coded. Even like Hermes Trismegistus would say, like to his disciples, milk for the children, meat for the men, which is effectively what Jesus did. When you're speaking to large crowds, speak in parables. Just speak at a very ground level. Some people will not even know what they're hearing, but they'll be like, yeah, that's right. That sounds true. I'll kind of sit with that, right? Like, and then they go back, right? Like a seed in the soil type of level. But as people get closer to Christ or to Hermes, or people that get closer to the truth, they can handle more depth. They can handle more esoteric knowledge being spoken plainly without freaking out, without saying that sounds demonic, without saying, like the Pharisees did, Jesus, what did you say? We're going to stone you to death right now. You know what I mean? Like, so there becomes a certain level of truth that can be jarring for somebody who's not quite ready to hear it. And the early onsets of this, when people are stuck really in a religious lifetime, when they're a soul who doesn't trust themselves to get out of it, they're still proving that they can hold the faith. Anything that sounds like it's a deviation sounds like it's a trap. It sounds like it's trying to groom you into becoming like a demon worshiper or something, right? Like this is a fear that a lot of Christians have. Anything that sounds different than this is going to lead me to hell. But when you start to let go of fear and start to trust and love, and at the very least just surrender, right? Like the Bible says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if there's a beginning, there's an end, which is its opposite. And if fear is a beginning, its opposite is love. So at every time you decide to say, you know what, I'm not going to be afraid that something has a power over me that can take me, because even in the Bible, there are a number of things that say effectively my perception is going to be shifted according to God's schedule. And this, you begin to realize the sooner I let go of fear and just get and flow with this and accept whatever is going to happen, the easier it gets, and the sooner things start shifting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I could jump in for what you said was, oh yeah, so a lot of people are scared when they hear something they're not ready to hear, even if it might come from someone who's trying to explain the truth.
Yeah.
And they can call it demonic.
Yeah.
I see this all the time, especially when it comes to anything with goat horns,
Yeah.
or
So the as above, so below thing, at an earlier stage, when people start noticing symbolisms and starting recognizing patterns, they associate that almost immediately, that phrase, with like Satanism, right? Or the Baphomet statue and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So at every turn, we have a choice. When God removed Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, the Lord God said, now the man has become as one of us to know good and evil. Both is part and parcel of being as gods. Man means mankind, by the way. When Adam is mankind, Eve is our connection to spirit, our intuition, our emotional intelligence, which led our curiosity to want to know good and evil. Thus began the process of our evolution. Things can only be known by firsthand experience. Even Jesus on the cross, Jesus the man, not God on the cross, who was saying, forgive them, they know not what they do. Jesus on the cross, the man who the night before was asking his friends to stay awake and pray for him. He was so nervous that he was praying to God to, can we do this another way? Either way, thy will be done, not mine. On the cross, Jesus said, Father, why have you forsaken me? He knew what he had to do. He didn't know how it was going to feel till he got there. He felt forsaken at that moment, right? Like at the the pinnacle of the moment where he also said, it is accomplished. He knew that was what he was supposed to do in that moment, like tied in this infinity loop. Everything is done. Everything is done. Past, present, future. It's all finite now. It's all created and adjusted. But that feeling, you won't know till you get there. So we have to evolve through firsthand experiences, which get retained in the DNA and get passed down through generations. The generation thing is very important because at the beginning of the book of Matthew, why does it make such a big point to list out the genealogy of Christ, which it charts all the way through Jesus? And the people in there are all kinds of people. There's King David. There's some people who sound very uneventful. If you don't pay attention, you might not notice that there's a name of a woman there who was also mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. This is fuzzy, but anyway, she was a famous prostitute in her day who had known all the soldiers of the opposing army until they eventually took over her city, and she married one of the captains and ended up having a prominent life, like becoming an honorable woman, so to speak. So that is in the genetic code and the inner knowing of Jesus Christ. So his being was not about being some totally pure thing that wisped up out of thin air. His whole life, his ego was present. He just never once gave into it. He was always guided and supported when needed and on task when able. So yeah, evolution through the process of knowing is part of what we're here to do, to effectively be born. More stuff on that in the Bible. So Noah's Ark was 40 days. The Jews, when they were taken out of Egypt, they spent 40 years in the wilderness before they could go to the promised land. Jesus fasted for 40 days and nights as soon as he got empowered by the Holy Spirit. 40. How long is a baby in the womb? For 40 weeks. So this ties into the word where you get matrix comes from the Bible, which is in the Old Testament, and it mentions everything that breaketh the matrix, openeth the matrix, shall be thine. Right? So nobody goes to hell. This is in the Bible. There's not a verse in there where it says anybody's going to hell for eternity. And as a matter of fact, Jesus, it's funny, we got Easter coming up in a few days, but at the feast, the week during Palm Sunday, the week before, when everybody was his best friend, and they were eating, and he told his friends, "If I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me." He didn't say people who get baptized and go to church every Sunday and do this and pray before every meal, right? He said, if I get lifted up, I'm going to draw everybody to me, every single person. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to go too in depth on the verses that connect these dots, but that is effectively the message. When he said that people will come from the east and the west and sit at the table with Abraham and Isaac and Joseph, when I be lifted up, I will draw everybody to me. When on the cross, he said, it is accomplished. That buttoned in this infinity loop where all consciousness moves through every type of experience and every opportunity to work through layers of karma until eventually arriving back at that cross and like getting what that was all about. It wasn't about establishing an exterior savior. It was about recognition of the message in him, which is that everything I've done, you can do more. He didn't say worship me or bow down to me. I'm Jesus of Nazareth, right? He just said, love God, love your neighbor as yourself. That takes a while to really grasp what that means. But effectively, he's saying that what's in me is in you. He did say that. He did say, I'm in the Father and you are in me and I'm in you. On that day, you'll understand what that means. I'm in the Father and the Father is in me. So the interconnectedness of all things and the divinity that animates all things and the karmic law that attaches to every action we have, part of why God said, vengeance is mine, because the moment you start taking things in your hand, you also take onto yourself the seeds you sow, you shall reap, the karmic debt attached to whatever you choose. That applies to every single person. So not asserting my will over your free will was the reason why Jesus died on the cross effectively, which is to say, regardless of how you're acting in this moment, out of complete like bloodlust or ignorance or fear or hatred or whatever, that is not who you really are. Who you really are is a son or daughter of the Most High. You are a being of high love vibration, capable of literally performing more miracles than you've seen me do. And in this moment, it would extremely benefit me if I chose any other course of action. But I'm choosing to hold on to the vibration of love so much that I am respecting your free will right now to give you the example and seal in this work of atonement for karmic debt, so that the people who are working through karma, unable to realize it yet, are covered until they get to a point where they snap out of it and become convicted of their left path, right path, whatever path behavior. And then those people usually end up doing a couple life cycles in a strictly religious time frame, where they are like that drug addict who needs the external savior. They need something outside of them to follow, to tell them what to do, to lean on when they mess up, because they are now at a point where they're like, all right, I need to do things differently, because that really was bad. I know for sure what I was doing was not what I want to do. So what would be better? I need an example. And then they move into becoming that next example.
Yeah. It's always made sense that the tragic story of Jesus is meaningful, deeply meaningful, and that, the question that arises as soon as anyone looks at the story is, how could, Jesus Christ, the most, perfect example of a perfect human, be put to death by the people of earth? And I think it shows, like you said, the extreme example of how to stay true to that divine being, that divine way of being, which is just surrendering to love and allowing, even though he could obviously have done anything to stop it from happening.
Right.
Having that example is powerful in like you said, anyone's life who's wondering, like, should I do this? Should I do that? To have that example and have that example be the savior. That's actually an interesting way of putting it. Like, everyone knows Jesus is the savior. Jesus saved us by dying on the cross. But you add that extra layer of by being an example of what we need to be.
Yeah. Because, especially when like I was younger, and like his disciples thought at the time, they thought he was going to overthrow Caesar, right? Like, and reestablish the order of things in real time. But the way he was doing that was at an energetic and spiritual level of demonstrating and honoring the power of autonomy and free will and divine will, and how those, or predestiny, and how those coordinate. So that was the thing. He didn't show up and pay everybody's bills. He didn't run around and like execute all the bad guys, right? Like
solve everyone's problems.
He didn't solve everyone's problems. What he said was, you are fully divinely entitled to make any choice you want. And in any choice you make, God grants you the ability to do that. You know what I mean?
Free will.
You could go do whatever you want. You want to go, loot a bank, go for it. See what happens. There is a universal law in place that keeps everybody tied to, just like if I plant an apple seed, I'm going to get an apple tree, and it's only ever going to grow apples, right? And their seeds will produce in kind. So that is a gift that we have as a universal law that ties to all of us. That where people get scared and when they start thinking, whoa, we don't have total permission. God will come and get me if I do this or that. I'm like, no, he won't. You will. Your own conscious, you will get yourself eventually. Just like when Cain and Abel were born, Abel represents spirituality or, enlightenment or the Christ. Cain represents the ego or fear-based behavior. The feelings of unworthiness caused him to kill his brother. It's not like God showed up and chopped his head off or something. He showed up and he's like, dude, what are you doing? I can hear your brother's blood calling out to me, right? Like there's a special thing that happens in the code with blood. Anyways, he kicks him out. The Garden of Eden was one place. Adam and Eve wanted to know good and evil. They had to go to another level of consciousness. Their children the ego and the spirit. The ego kind of hopped in and took the reins for a little bit, had to go to another place. But Cain said to God, if you kick me out, the other people will see me and they'll surely kill me for what I've done. So God put a mark on his head of protection so no one else would hurt him. That's also indicative. No matter what happens and no matter in what way God steps in to course correct, there's always sort of a grace that says it doesn't matter what you did. You're going to get another chance. You're not going to have fun, probably based on what you did. Your next chance may not be too pleasurable, but you can continue working through this until you give yourself enough permission to stop being the person who's poking the spear in the side of Christ by mocking it or by discrediting it, and by just accepting the message that literally God and I are one. I am in the Father and the Father is in me. You could use another term for Father. You could say parent, which in the Lord's Prayer in the original Aramaic, when he said Heavenly Father, he didn't say Father. The word he used in Aramaic was non-gender specific, and for people who only speak English, that gets tricky. When if you practice other languages where they have different genders and then words that are broader. But anyways, the word he used was more akin to a word parent. It wasn't representative of just a father. But either way, I am in that, and that is in me. That is also where he said, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is just like saying, as above, so below. That is just like noticing that the cells within my body, when they reach a certain point of maturity, they split apart and now they're two cells. And that looks similar to what happens when you see stars split, or when you see these similarities that are unignorable.
Correspondence.
Yeah, between the cosmic and the micro and the macro levels. These things start to all of a sudden, all these dots that were so far apart and some of them seemed spooky or blasphemous, they all start to blend together and look exactly identical as part of a bigger scope of things. And you can only see that when you are consciously able to hold on to that without rejecting it or crucifying it.
I mean, part of that is intellectual, and one of the things that I love to think about is like the Hermetic principle that all is mind. And just like the universe has a mind and we have a mind, and we're the microcosm to the macrocosm, we look at our bodies and we see that we have a mind, a heart, but also a gut. And these different parts of ourselves correspond to bigger principles. And, that's some of the beauty in the teachings of like the chakras, 7 chakras in the body that represent certain aspects. But the mind is sort of at the top. And again, like it's at the highest point because, mind has power over matter. And again,
why is the heart in the center, by the way? And why is the heart associated with love? It's directly in the middle, and that is what can reach to the depths of the root, where it can get very heavy and a consciousness can get very stuck in root-based, fear-based, lust-based activities and ideas. Love is what will reach down and help pull a seed up through the soil towards the light. Love is also what will reach up to the intellect and prevent intellectualization from becoming like a Tower of Babylon, which is like, I'm the supreme now because I know it all. Love is that thing that helps anchor someone back into a grounding, and not becoming isolated in fear-based, and not becoming isolated in better than energies.
like pride.
Yes.
Yeah, the sin of Lucifer. Yeah, I love how, when you tell stories of the Bible, you know the symbolism, what Cain represents, what Abel represents, what Adam represents, what Eve represents. That's that sort of deeper knowing that is necessary to get the deeper message that is in the story. And again, when we look at like the interpretations of these stories, specifically the Adam and Eve story, it's interpreted in so many ways. But one of the things I love is the Gnostic idea that that Adam and Eve, they felt that desire for wisdom, and the serpent kind of tells him, "Oh yeah, if you eat from that fruit, you won't die. You'll become like the gods."
Which wasn't a lie,
It
because
wasn't a lie.
a couple verses later, that's literally what the Lord God said.
Yes.
Like in the book, the Lord God said, "Now they've become as one of us," which also,
Yeah.
to be noted, God referred to itself as plural.
Yes.
So that wasn't a lie. That was part of the process. We're here to be born through the matrix, through the womb of this experience. And all the 40 days talk, Moses parting the Red Seas, all of that pregnancy talk.
Oh my God.
That is like, if you from a human biological standpoint, like what am I? I'm not just this body, because this body is trillions of parts, right? That, like, stuff we're still discovering about. We can't intellectualize our way to truth. The more powerful our microscopes get, the smaller, like, we can see, which means the bigger the universe gets. The more powerful our telescopes get, the more it appears that the universe is expanding into what, I don't know. The better our carbon dating gets. Science keeps finding the Earth to be older, never finds it to be younger. Like, hey, wait a minute, we messed up. That was wrong. It's actually only this amount of years old, right? It only keeps, the further we try to intellectualize and look for something, the farther it gets, right? And that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to check our own capacity against God. So how can we know it all? We can't, because it's God, like that is a mirror representation of our consciousness, right? Like, we're trying to form an idea of God based on our ability to contain it and define it. We can't do that. It's going to remain outside of our grasp, no matter how big and intelligent we get. Like, it is always going to be there at whatever next level we're at trying to find it, until eventually we sit still and be like, wait a minute, maybe, what if I don't look for it? What if I sit tight and just let it take its course? Just like when there's an egg and all the sperm get there, they actually cover it, and the egg chooses which sperm to let in. There is autonomous, intelligent decision making happening at the cellular level. Then they go in there. Now they're one thing, and this whole process begins happening. Cells begin going through their own process, separating, until eventually they become organs, they become body parts, they become bones, they become nerve and vessels, right? We see this at a larger level in society. Every now and then, the consciousness of society gets to a point where there's a dividing line, there's a war, there's a huge topic, right? There's 2020, there's masks and vaccines, right? Like, there's always something where the collective consciousness reaches a point and it splits a little bit. Now, within the body, I use this example a lot, but I have a finger. It's not me. I guess it's part of me, but I'm observing it. It's autonomous enough that as long as my body is still animated and active, if I cut my finger, there's a bunch of stuff in there that will do its own thing to begin healing that cut. But because I have formed a bond and a connection through neural pathways with that finger, it will send a signal called pain to my brain that says, hey, there's a problem here. We're going to try to fix it on our own, but you may want to get one of your other body parts involved and put a Band-Aid on it or something to try to help out, if you want. If not, we'll work on it, right? So that is kind of what that's like. We as individuals are parts of a body, and God is like the consciousness, the brain, the power center. Christ, or Christ consciousness, is the neural pathway that forms a connection, right? Now, right now, a lot of people are parts of the body that are coming online. That nerve connection is coming online. That's why there's this mass awakening happening. So many people are reaching this point right now where they're asking these questions and they're comfortable, like, receiving this kind of truth and knowing that it resonates, because so many people are becoming one with God. They are a part of the body that is forming an unbreakable nerve connection with God. And just like it mentions, the Holy Spirit is the messenger that intercedes on our behalf. That's effective, the energy. That's the electric impulse that shoots back and forth that transmit the message, right? So that's one way of looking at what's happening. We as fractals of Source, we as members of the body of Christ, have reached a level in our development and our maturity on a collective level where a bunch of us right now are connecting. We're tapping in.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for bringing me back. I had something I wanted to say. I forgot about it, and then you brought me back with the fractal. So I wanted to talk about sacred geometry, because as soon as I started learning about sacred geometry, it it represented such a great physical example of things that happen not only in the physical world but in the spiritual world. And when you talk about the cells breaking apart, becoming two, um, the flower of life is the perfect example of like one circle becoming two, becoming four, becoming six, becoming 12, and the way that the shape can be seen as a fractal or like a microcosm to a macrocosm. Sacred geometry definitely helped me to visualize the way things come together, and it's such a beautiful representation of like spiritual concepts. And so, yeah, has sacred geometry been useful to you at all?
You know what's funny? I actually got the seed of life. I don't know if you can see it, but I got that tattoo right here. So it's a tattoo of a blooming lotus. I wanted something. Is it nice? I wanted to get something that represented claircognizance. That was really coming online for me, and I wanted to own it without feeling like, just own it without worrying if it sounded blasphemous or whatever. And normally this symbol has like an Om symbol in the middle, but instead I wanted to put the seed of life before I really even knew what it was, but it was calling to me. But yeah, as science has determined that the nature of reality is less matter and more vibration and frequency. People have kind of know, Tesla knew this, and Einstein mentioned it, and the number of ways this is referenced across cultures that didn't know each other existed at the time, at least as far as from our perspective of history looks. The amount of like ancient temples that have sacred geometry like carved into it and stuff like that. The fact that people were aware of this, that now with modern scientific tools, we can demonstrate exist within matter or within the vibrations created in water and other materials. This is one of those like synchronicities. This is one of those aha moments where at an intellectual level, it becomes very easy to now accept that there is a unifying work, a unifying order of things that has existed for a long enough time to have been true and revealed itself at a time and in a place to a people who had no possible way of connecting to right now with the things we have access to, but it's revealing itself to us in a way that speaks. And that was what I mentioned earlier. In the Egyptian time, they were just as cosmopolitan as we were now. Like at all times, in all places, society kind of has available ways to know the highest truths for those who are able and ready to receive it. So the sacred geometry, that's another one of those things that for me, like, because it's been so prevalent and because it breaks down such a simple yet profound nature of what we would call reality or consciousness, that lets me sit back in that place that exists much farther than my five senses and outside of the construct of human language, right? Because all of this exists way beyond anything a human language can seek to define, right? So as long as we're trying to intellectualize, we're always going to be limited. We are limiting ourselves. And as thus, we're still not realizing that God is a reflection of ourselves. We're trying to expand ourselves intellectually so that we can define and codify God. But that's eventually, once you've seen enough, you have to be like, oh, I get it. I can't do that. He's like, it has been everywhere all the time, always, in and out of everything I'm ever going to be able to like fully like track down, at least in my lifetime. So why don't I just sit still and see what happens when I shut up and listen to Source for a little while? And this is why the people who talk a lot about meditation, a lot of people that mention, like Eckhart Tolle talks about being in the now, or when they really make such importance about the breath, why God mentioned that made our body out of clay, then God breathed the breath of life into man. It becomes extremely profound when you can start to sit with the stillness and the profound truth that will reveal itself to you if you can exist only in the breath that really happens for you. I can sort of control it, but if I don't try to, it'll do it on its own. It'll do it for me, right? My heartbeat will beat on its own for me. And if I can sit with those and listen to those and then begin to hear all of the clockwork within my body, harmonizing all of the intelligence going on, swooshing around through my body, that pretty quickly, if you're ready for it, will start to let you feel your energetic self. And then from there, it won't be long before you can let go of the story of you long enough to not need to hang on to the things you have come to know through the perception as a human. And you can begin to experience yourself more fully as energy, as an energetic state, which is then closer to source consciousness. And you can experience yourself as energy through the eyes of or existence of other things besides just yourself. And all that, again, ties 100% into sacred geometry, because that is a connecting dot to all these people, places, and things and times that, to me, brought me back to a place of stillness where I could shut up long enough to actually hear the voice of God that doesn't speak English, doesn't speak on the sound and light waves that I'm usually seeing and operating in. So I have to shut up and let my sixth and seventh senses, my gut and my psychic knowledge, kick in a little bit.
Yeah. The focus on the breath is so important and foundational, and the idea that spirit, the word spirit, comes from the Latin word for breath, is so interesting. And I actually just watched this video, I think a couple days ago, where this guy points out all of the words that actually have the Latin root spirit in it, including ones you might not even think about, including inspire. So when you're inspired, you have the breath in you. When you aspire towards something, you're breathing towards it. That's what aspire means. You're breathing towards it. When I was in college, I actually made a documentary for one of my classes. It was like a video documentary making class. And so I chose to make a documentary called The Modern Search for God. And I interviewed one of my teachers who was from a Buddhist background, because I wanted to get that perspective. And I asked him something along the lines of like, what is your connection to spirit, or what's your what is your spirituality? And he immediately said, well, spirit is breath. And he said, when I'm breathing, the earth is breathing. And when I'm breathing and the earth is breathing, there's a harmony that happens if we, get on the same wavelength. And like you said, with modern language, we have different words now than they used in the Bible. So we use words like energy, frequency, wavelength, to describe the same things. But breath, breath kind of has something to do with frequency. You're breathing at a certain rate.
What did Jesus say, right? Like, God is a spirit and must be worshipped in spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then in the Old Testament, when it talks about, there's a verse that says to meditate day and night on the word of God and all that is good and holy. Mm-hmm. That ties into the meditation and motion aspect. Visualization and meditation. I was talking about this earlier. I never mentioned any more much about me or my personal history, but for about 6 years, I was a professional fighter back in the day. I've never gone on a psychedelic journey or done any of that stuff. But during my avenues of self-discovery, my time as a fighter really gave me a exposure to meditation, to a version of breath work, and to visualization, and to ultimately sitting in a harmony to pull a lot of energies that you might imagine experiencing. This was after the Marines, so I was already kind of used to dealing with the stress and conflict space and energetics, but it's different in this way. So when you're anticipating something that you have to look forward to knowing is coming, there's obviously a lot of anxiety and feelings, so you start to develop practices to cope with that. And as such, in doing that, you begin to find what athletes call that space where you're in the flow, where you're performing. You are truly meditation in motion, and those best performances, look at any race car drivers, boxers, like ball players, it's the same thing where they are in this state where they're having the best performance of their life, yet it feels 100% effortless, like you're almost not even there, like you're just watching the experience happen through you. And that is 100% being in the state of Christ, where you're like, my ego has like was in flow enough with the work as it needed to be done. But right now, I'm so not concerned with this outcome necessarily. I'm just exactly nowhere else but right here in this moment. And as such, like this beautiful thing is happening that requires no effort. It's just the most amazing, elevated, surreal feeling. One of the peak moments of life is when you hit that flow.
Yeah.
And that, so tying back to like experience, right? Like, why do we have things in order to experience it? And they're just like religion or loose spirituality or other forms of philosophy can become constrictive, but at a certain point, they can also be an experience that activates parts of your evolution. And just like, I don't need to be a professional fighter for very long, but it afforded me enough firsthand experience to touch energetic states that that was it, to just touch it. They would have been available to other people in other places and other avenues. No one thing is a requirement to be your teacher, because if so, it would, just like you said with religion, there can't just be one thing that excludes almost everybody else who will never have a chance to hear about it or experience it that way. But the energetic of that thing ties you back to the one thing, which is the one truth, which is that when you're right here, right now, and in the breath, there is a special thing that happens when you can truly let go of everything else, and your ego just kind of like sits there. And it's like, you know what? I guess I don't need to. You got this, right? Like, and then you just
in the zone. I know exactly what you're talking about from playing music. So for my thing, it's playing music.
Nice.
And we talk about it all the time. When you're playing with a group, you have this the same thing that happens. You get in the zone where you forget. You're not thinking about what the next note you're supposed to play. You're flowing, and like it's so easy. Like you're playing the best you've ever played, and it feels like you're not even trying. That's exactly the feeling that you're describing.
Yeah.
Being in the zone. There's a movie called Soul.
The movie's fantastic, by the way.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know how the guy's spinning the sign, and he leaves his body and he goes into the astral realm, and like up there's people dancing, singing. It's everyone who's in the zone. That's what that realm was. It's the zone. You can get there by sign swinging. You could spin signs and get there. Yeah, there's not one religion. You don't have to play music or fight. You could just spin signs and you can get there.
Yeah. Music is I enjoy music. My kids have been telling me I should get a guitar and start playing again. I haven't played since I was a kid, but to do it with them and the instruments they play. But the creative process is something that eludes me, right? Like that's not for me. Like I can play music, but I cannot create. Like I'm not an artist, right? Like there are people who paint, and then there are people who create, right? Like so, the act of creation is the highest form of consciousness. It's truly tapping into things that don't exist and making it exist, right? So music, art, conscious entrepreneurship, engineers, stuff like that, like people who are bringing things into the world that weren't, I guess when I write, maybe that's as close.
I was going to say, you speak.
That's part of it, writing, speaking, and I've made a bunch of kids. So, so that's some of it. But like the creative process, especially in music, which everybody understands music, right? Like regardless of who's who, when you go to a concert and you look out in the crowd, there's all kinds of people from all kinds of places and vocations, but there are certain uniform truths that just speak to people, and sound and vibration happen to be way at the top of the list. And as we know, sound and vibration are, we're coming to find that to be more the nature of reality. Then it becomes even more peculiar that the Bible makes so many references to God having a choir and how big of a deal that is, and how Lucifer was the lead angel of the choir, this beautiful thing like literally physically made of instruments, and his punishment. This used to drive me nuts. I used to be so angry at the Bible for this. I was like, well, if he was the bad guy, why was his punishment to come down to earth and be given like to be the God of earth? The Bible says the devil is the God of this earth, right? And then as you start to play back and forth through these series of events and let go of any fear of what this might mean and just accept the truth of it, it very quickly becomes very clear that Lucifer, the devil, is just the ego. who was right there in the presence of God, who decided to be God, which means I'm in the flow, I'm right here. And rather than say, hey, Jesus, like Jesus said, can you take this cup from me? But either way, thy will be done, not mine. Satan said, you know what? My will, not yours. So that's instantly puts you right back into ego and removes you from the presence of God. And it puts you in a different set of energetics where you're making decisions based on what you think is best for your immediate self. And that is the God of this world. That the ego, the need to
Ego.
Even a lot of times people have a subtle ego where they think they're being of service, or they think they're giving, or they think they're forgiving, but what they're doing is self-martyring as an avenue of self-exploration or like secret ego, when they really may not be called to be the martyr. Like they're maybe what they need to learn is it's in their lifetime, they're supposed to realize it's okay to set healthy boundaries. It's okay to defend yourself. It's okay to tell people no. There's 40 verses in the New Testament of times where Jesus had to tell people no or leave a crowd when he's like, hey, I'm done for the day. My energy is out. Or not doing any good works in his hometown because of their unbelief. It's like, okay, you guys don't want to go for this. I'm not gonna force you. I'm not gonna change your mind for you. It's up to you. And that is effectively the whole message of God. It's up to you. You can pick and choose whatever you want. The tree of knowledge is literally right there. I told you don't do it, but you can all you want. What people don't realize is at any point you can stop eating the apple and you can go back to that Garden of Eden state of being whenever you decide to stop indulging in duality and conflict and exploration of energies that no longer help you develop.
Whoa, that is huge. Yeah. So a few things that I love is the understanding the story of Lucifer on a symbolic level is huge. It's so interesting that Lucifer, the story of Lucifer, most people don't know is like from a modern book, Paradise Lost, like 1500s or whatever.
Yeah.
Most people think that story's in the Bible, even though it's just, it's not from the Bible.
Yeah.
But there's so many parts of our religion that were developed over the past 2,000 years. There's one guy that I love to watch named Dan McClellan. He talks about what the writers of the Bible meant and contrasts with some modern interpretations of these stories. And a lot of times he points out that the concept of the Trinity was developed hundreds of years after the Bible was written. Whoever wrote the Bible definitely was not writing, from a Trinitarian perspective. But again, with the idea of Lucifer falling from heaven, the symbolic meaning and putting that ego as, again, going away from the path, left, right, or down or up, all of these directionals from the one path, which is like divine, is indicative of sin.
Yeah, missing the mark, right? Like, it's people who don't take the time to dig into the etymology. Nobody really reads the Bible. Everything that people have as an idea of all these things, it's all hand-me-down stuff from somebody who also didn't study this on their own. They just heard it from someone who heard it from someone who heard it. And somewhere along the line is the most, it's Easter coming up and my neighbor across the street has a bunch of bunnies and like eggs and stuff, right? Like because of Jesus, like, you know what I mean? Like, what are we doing? So, and that's fine. And it's fun. And it's
traditions. Traditions are great.
At that point, traditions have become a very comfortable security blanket under which to sleep. And usually when people try to pull that and wake you up, people get real like grumpy about it. Don't do it. But eventually we all get woken up, right? If you've read my book, that was like one of the first things I mentioned, that they're usually the beginning phases of a spiritual awakening are not fun or comfortable at all. It's effectively like a spiritual alarm clock that was set in advance to wake you up right when you kind of meant to. Just like there's a an algorithm in my body, in my cells, that say you're going to go this long and then you're going to split, or you're going to die, or you're going to turn. At one point I was just a clump of cells in a womb, and then all of a sudden I had different body parts. I didn't have eyes always, right? Like, so the same way, we're just developing.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. Traditions and stories being passed down is so funny. There's this funny story that goes, there was say a grandma who every time she cooked a roast, she would cut off both ends before putting it in the oven. And then she taught her daughter to do it that way. And then her daughter grew up and she had children, and then she taught her child cut off both ends of the roast before putting it in the oven. And the daughter said, why are we doing this? Why are you cutting off like this perfectly good meat? And she's like, I don't know, my mom always did it. Ask your grandma. And she goes, Grandma, why do we always cut off the ends of the roast before putting in the oven? She's like, oh, you don't have to do that. I only did that because my oven was too small. I couldn't fit it in the oven, but you have a bigger oven. You don't have to cut off the ends anymore.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. That's I was taking some college classes. I didn't get a degree, but I was taking some classes I wanted to take for a while back. And in a psychology class, there's this famous study that anybody who's gone to psychology, or you can Google it, but there's this study of monkeys in a cage. They put a bunch of monkeys in there. They put a banana at the top. The thing that they need to climb to get it was electrified. So every time any of the monkeys would try to climb to get it, it wasn't electrified. It would rain in there on all the monkeys. So what would happen is all the monkeys knew that climbing there to get the banana eventually meant getting rained on and being uncomfortable. They hate rain, right? So anytime they would eventually take a monkey out, put a new monkey in. New monkey has never been rained on. He sees a banana. I'm going to go get it. As soon as he would start to climb the pole, all the other monkeys would yank him down and prevent him from doing it, because they knew him climbing meant rain and they didn't want to get rained on. And they kept swapping out the monkeys until eventually none of the original monkeys were there. Every monkey that's in here has never once been rained on. All they know is that we stop people from climbing to get the banana when they climb it, right? So none of them would do it. They wouldn't get it because they'd all like established this way of doing things without even knowing why it was originally began. And that is a lot of times, that's part of why Jesus popped in when he did. There was a very firmly set religious industrial complex that said, here's how it works. And you're saying things we don't like, so we're going to kill you. So every now and then there is a rock of the boat at a collective level, at an individual level. Usually every time you start to get complacent or comfortable, that's when the fork in the road comes and says, now you're going to have to make a decision. And it's not, whichever one you pick won't probably be comfortable right at first, but you have to always pick love, not fear. Whatever you're doing, every energetic state you're holding or a decision you make in any moment, trying to be aware of, is it coming from fear, which is all kinds of things. That turns into lust, anger, ambition, all kinds of things, right? Like, am I doing it from a fear-based place to avoid something, to get something, or am I doing it from a love place of acceptance that I know, one, there's a lot of stuff that's really out of my hands. The past and the future are not mine, that's God's. I can't be Lucifer and say, I want to be God. I've got to give it up to that part and just trust that what was said, the parts that I want to hold on to, are that I work everything for the good of those who believe in me, that I can just relax and do as I'm told. If something pops into my field that seems like a warning or like something bad is coming, if source is giving you a warning, it's either going to come with an immediate solution. You don't have to figure it out on your own. It's either going to give you the thing you need to do, and you'll have a peace of knowing, like, hey, Herod wants to kill your kid, so take him to Egypt, right? Like there's all kinds of stuff that says, hey, I'm about to flood the entire world, so build an ark. Here's how you do it. Mm-hmm. So if there's a warning, you shouldn't have to be afraid, because it's either I'm going to tell you exactly what to do, or it's a test to see if you'll just sit tight and not do anything until you're told what to do. Or if your ego is going to be like, oh crap, I'm afraid about money. I need to go get this type of job that's out of my anxiety, right? Or I'm worried about this relationship, or whatever I'm worried about, whatever I see coming down the line that feels uncomfortable. If you don't have an immediate solution that pops in that feels peaceful and like a clear direction, but if you're acting out of, I should figure something out, that's ego and fear-based. And that's like sort of, you're going to have to take that test again.
Oh yeah. I've seen that a lot in my life. you know, God gives us tests, and yeah, when we get scared, you can make the wrong choice if you act rashly,
Yeah.
make too quickly of a decision.
Yeah.
Going back to when you mentioned visualization as a tool, um, I think it's something that my parents taught me at a young age. My mom, I remember telling me, like, even in sports, like, hey, just visualize that trophy being on your table there. Like, it's gonna be there. You're gonna be fine. And that kind of goes along the same lines of trusting the process, trusting you're gonna get there as long as you do all the steps. But at the same time, tying in the whole idea of going along with this prescribed set of rules. Once the set of rules gets too rigid, like you said, during Jesus' time, the rigid religious framework was so rigid. They were following rules. They didn't know why they were following them. They just thought that the book was the law was God. And I think the problem with that is that people look at the book as God, and
Yes.
then you're worshiping the idol.
Yes. That's
The idol is a symbol. It represents something higher.
Yeah. When I look at the Catholic Church, that's what I think of. That is people who have missed the mark, and now that, like, anything you begin to make the way rather than sitting in the breath of God and like the oneness with God, anything else, because that is the way that Jesus like I am
Mm-hmm.
the way, and
Mm-hmm.
all of you can do it this way. He never said, I, Jesus, want you to worship me and, all that stuff. He said, I am this way,
Yes.
do it this way.
Yes.
So once people start to idolize and create these exterior things, then what happens is you see spiritual gatekeeping, which are people who have access to the true nature of things enough to, like, speak truth that speaks to everybody's innate need to want to know truth and to want to connect to divinity. So they sort of become a blockade, and they let some of that truth trickle down and say, pay me, worship me, like, do things this way. We're running the show. I'm the Pope, right? Like, or I'm whatever. But they're blocking, versus what Jesus did was say, hey, I'm trying to help you connect on your own. Like an Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee, when he's like teaching at the start, and he's like, it's like a finger pointing away to the stars, and he slaps the kid. He's like, don't look at the finger, you'll miss all the heavenly glory. So that's
Yes.
a simple breakdown of that concept.
Wow. So one thing that I just learned right now during our conversation, I think one of the things I didn't understand was the idea that, like, God, we have a divine nature. We have a connection to God. Some Christians may hear you say, oh, I have a divine connection to God. And they say, that's blasphemous. And the idea of Lucifer saying, I want to be God. Well, that is blasphemous.
Yeah.
So the difference that, I had to just learn, the nuance, is that I'm not God, but I have a connection to God.
Yeah.
So saying I have a connection to God is not saying I am God.
And people who stop someone else from proclaiming their connection to God, that is the devil. That is the inverse ego that makes them God by saying, you're wrong. We can't be connected to God. Like, or what you're, you know what I mean? Like, they don't even realize they're assuming their own, like inverse
righteousness.
Yeah. They're assuming their own righteousness by this fake humility. Right. There are tons of tremendous good things in religious structures and in religious small groups, especially, and in organized churches for the most part. And you see a lot of these quiet people, especially older people, that are just sweet, and they never really give you much feedback or kickback as you're going through your thought process. They just leave plenty of space for you to feel love from them when you bring an idea to them. And other than that, they kind of shut up. But the ones that are like the most averse, the ones that are the most fear-based, that your idea might somehow damn them. I had a friend reach out to me not too long ago, and the heck was that? Why is it doing that?
You had some balloons earlier too.
Oh my gosh. I had a friend reach out. He was very concerned that I was demon possessed, and I was like, he was like, I'm going to pray I'm going to pray to God about you tonight. And this, I was like, well, if you're going to pray, like just pray that God's will be done, not yours over me. You get
Right.
what I'm saying?
Oh, wow. Yes. Oh my gosh, that's powerful. That's
Yeah.
really powerful. Because yeah, one of the churches that I went to at one point that I loved was a New Thought church. And the New Thought um like philosophy is the idea of manifestation. You know, everyone's talking about manifestation,
Mm-hmm.
but also the idea that like your prayer has real power,
Mm-hmm.
and if you want to like hold a prayer for someone's well-being, you have that power. But definitely don't pray that your will be done to someone else. That sounds
Boom.
like a sorcerer.
Even if it's healing, right? Like to some degree, even if it's healing, um,
Yeah,
everybody,
if you're visualizing the healed version that's not, that you think is the healed version, it might be
yeah,
not the right.
yeah, God, it may be their time, or it may be their time to experience part of their evolution through this physical struggle. Like from my perspective, I can't see the grand inner workings of all the cosmos, right? But there is a harmony to everything that touches and ripples out into everything else. And as soon as I start trying to adjust those ripples, I can't see how far out I'm going to cause disharmony potentially.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
existing in a state of harmony usually looks a lot less like doing or affecting, and it
Hmm.
looks a lot more like just trying to remain in that state of right now. I just made a video about this, I think yesterday, but like the free will exists right now. Right now, in this moment, is our divine space and free will to choose any state of energy or attention where we're looking, what we're putting our attention to, what energy we're holding on to. But the moment I start trying to use my current energetic state to create or alter or direct the past or the future, that's when I move into that state of like Lucifer, that like a lightning bolt will kick me right out of the presence of heaven, because now I'm fragmented across all these things that aren't really mine to control. So the concept of manifestation, just like the concept of sacred geometry, it's an initiation process. It's a way in which to become aware, just like Jacob when he wrestled with God, and he asked, "What's your name?" And the angel said, "Well, where are we?" So Jacob named the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life was spared. So this is in reference to the capacity we have to interact with and sometimes even make demands of that grand consciousness, that grand order of things. But you eventually hit a roadblock where you're like, okay, sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Why not? It's strictly just to bring to my full knowing, not my guessing, not my sort of peculiarity, but my knowing that there is an interworking of things that will work with me, but I can't get my way. I can't like overcome it, right? Like we can reach a stalemate and I can get a blessing, and it's going to cost me my hip because I wrestled with it. To anyone who knows that story. But manifestation will get you to a certain point, and its limitations are God saying your telescope's never going to get big enough. Your microscope's never going to get powerful enough. Like what you're going to have to do is relax into harmony, because I've got tomorrow, I've got creation already sorted out. I am the beginning and the end, all of infinity. Like it is accomplished. It's already all buttoned up and taken care of. And the sooner you can get in harmony with it and stop trying to like mess with it from your first person point of view, then you're in that flow. And as you as a musician, as any athlete, as like anybody that's ever felt that flow, it could be the simplest thing, right? But like once you felt it, everything not that feels not nearly as fun, right? So the flow is the space where we are allowed to spend pretty much all of our life if we will stop choosing to eat the apple, to stop playing with duality, to stop allowing our attention to get frustrated at the news or to feel compelled to do this or that, unless that is truly the aligned call of our heart for that current thing of our evolution. Does that make any sense? So once you've experienced through enough firsthand things for yourself, coupled with your DNA, once there becomes enough of a level of completion to feel satisfied with duality and conflict and exploration, then you can sort of retire into flow with spirit. And then at that point, God's no longer speaking to you through the world. Now you are in flow, and God speaks through you to the world. And that is how pockets of the collective get uplifted. Like Jesus said, if I be lifted up, we'll lift everybody up to me. And here we are 2,000 years later. No matter who anybody is or where in the world they're at least aware of that name, and they're at least aware that it is a figure worth considering or discussing or even being controversial. Versus Alexander the Great, there's no argument. There's nothing controversial about a guy who conquered massive territories and did all these things. That's a win, because that is upholding the status quo of the ego timeline, which is accrue unto myself more and more and more and more and more. And he did it at such a young age. What a hero. Of course, there's nothing bad about that. But a guy who showed up and was like, sure, pay your taxes if you want. Give unto Caesar that which is his, and give unto God that which is God's, which, by the way, all the law of all the prophets, I'm not here to break it. I'm here to fulfill it by telling you you can do all those things by loving God and loving your neighbor. That's literally it. Also, see these miracles I'm doing? You can and should be doing them and more. That's all I'm going to tell you. Don't worship me. Just get involved with your own connection to God. That got him killed, and he's controversial. Now, why is that?
Yeah.
Right.
That's my favorite thing that I've heard you say, is pointing out that place in the Bible where Jesus said, all of these things that I do, you can do. It's so huge. It's like you said, there's spiritual gatekeepers that don't want everyone in the congregation to know.
Who's a spiritual gatekeeper? I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to, while this is coming, we are our own spiritual gatekeeper, right? Like, we are the one making our choices at every time. And just like Peter, for half a second, decided to get out and stand on the water, he's in a place on a boat, on rocky ground, like unstable ground in a storm, can't see. There's the figure of the man he has mostly come to believe in. And he says, I want to get out there with you. He stands on the water for a moment. Then he looks around and realizes, I'm in a storm on water, and everything I've known up to this point says if you're on a storm in water, you sink in the water. He was on the water while he was willing to accept that truth. But he got afraid and decided, you know what, I'm going to stick with what I've known, with what everybody else agrees with. So he sunk himself, right? Like, and that is another message of everything Jesus was saying. Like, the moment we stop gatekeeping and stop saying there's a they that are hindering me, or there's a they that are so much greater than me, I shouldn't say that. That becomes a thin line to nuance. Like, but it's integrating all of it and realizing that whatever I am seeing outside of myself is truly a mirror projection of my inner state. So what am I seeing, and what is that telling me? If I'm seeing a they that are keeping people from Christ, that's me doing that. That's me keeping people from Christ by accepting that it's possible to do that. Versus if I just get out of my own way and sit in Christ consciousness and sit into a more deeply evolving relationship with God in that way, then it becomes impossible to think that anybody else is stopping anybody from doing it. I can just say, nobody can stop you. You can choose whenever you want. And the beauty of God is he's never going to force any choice upon you. He's going to give you the choice. And when you fuck up along the way, like we will all the time, there's going to be grace that covers you, that brings you back around the loop until you decide to make other choices. But either way, it's all up to you.
Oh, I think we've reached the point to bring up The Matrix. The Matrix is like the movie that just so well encapsulates some ancient truth somehow in a modern story. But when you talk about, like, if you believe that you can stand on water, then you can stand on water. And when Neo believed that he could stop bullets, he could stop bullets. And so the Matrix represents this world, and the idea that they could wake up in the real world. And the real world was not the Matrix. This concept is like new and yet not new. I think it goes back to the idea of the spirit world being more real than the physical world. And the ancient teachings saying that, like, the physical world is not all there is.
Right.
And I think that's the spiritual teaching that is the start of something greater. Like, we first have to acknowledge that we are not only our bodies, like you said. We're so much more than that. And the consciousness that exists in the center of who we are is that connection to God
Yeah.
and that spirit. That's yeah. Somehow the Matrix also points back to a reality more real than the physical reality. I don't know
And
if there's
even
a question after
and
that.
even that's a choice. The one guy who got sick of the post-apocalyptic reality said, "I think the Matrix can be more real." While he's sitting there, thinking about the steak that he was
Steak.
eating, the
Oh.
Judas character who sold everyone out for his 30 pieces of silver.
Hmm.
Um, so my
Ooh, I got a
favorite.
question for if I can jump back in. So actually, here's a good question. The world that we live in, I feel that it is real.
Mhm. It
So
is. It's all real. There's no one that's fake or an illusion or any of this or that. They're
yes,
they're
that's what I
all.
don't believe in. It's not an
Yeah,
illusion.
yeah.
It is real. So we have to come down, and there is this like critique of Gnosticism, which is that the Gnostics, they almost hate their body. They hate
Mhm.
the physical reality.
Yep.
And it happens to those groups that said, "Oh, just kill yourself, we'll go to heaven."
Yeah,
And we can feel inherently there's something wrong with that, right?
yeah. The just like the people you mentioned, like Buddhists and people like that, they seem just so like oddly peaceful, and that any response they give you seems so peculiarly simple. You're like, I'm not what. There's nowhere else to go, right? Like consciousness is everywhere at all times, right? Like if I am in the Father and the Father is in me, if I am in God and God is in me, and God is all is mind and
Hmm.
consciousness is all,
Hmm.
then effectively I am consciousness at this moment looking through this particular set of eyes. But as we talked about getting into the breath and getting into allowing myself to separate from my senses and from my story and let that go a little bit, not because I need to kill myself to go find it, but because I can let it go enough to be comfortable standing on the water and then experience the energetic version of myself. I'm not just all of the cells and inner workings of my body. I am aware of that. I am now like deciding to disconnect from my senses and experience myself as energy, which is in closer proximity to source consciousness. From this level, you can see across broader ranges of time, and you can move as energy into the experience of other things like plants, animals. You hear about, the science is now proving there is consciousness literally in all things. Plants communicated through the roots, all that stuff. So, experiencing yourself in the energetic, this becomes more like experiencing yourself as the Trinity, right? Like if there's the brain, the Son, and the Holy Ghost is the intermediary, the energy that fluctuates between the two. So thankfully, me, Cleburn, is a real fixed point of consciousness along a linear timeline here on earth at this time. I'll have a birth and a death. And during that time, I've got this fixed timeline that my energy can reside in and experience through. And that consciousness, that God, when he gets bored, living, like loving you enough to go through your whole life with you and feel and experience everything you go through, every up and down, every time you are on your ass and you need something to kind of pull you through, or every time you're like way high and you need something to kind of bring you back to reality. Like God is literally with you in your life by living your life through your eyes.
Mm.
And at some point, he's here living through my eyes. And because time doesn't mean anything to God, I make this reference a lot. When you have a dream and you go to sleep at night and in your brain, you interact with people. So those people that are talking to you and interacting or doing whatever, it's in your head. They're all you, right? Like those are all things that you thought up. You gave them the script that they're reading to you. The only reason you perceive it from your perspective is so that there is an experience. Because if I was just like in a funhouse room full of mirrors, that would not be as fun, right? Like there would be no experience. There would just be consciousness in a place where nothing exists and everything exists all at once. But because nothing is being perceived, because there's no veils, there's no contrast, there's no texture, then there's effectively nothing. And that is what happens whenever you're in the body, my real body anchored in a real timeline that is linear, my energetic body less bound by the laws of physics and by the constructs of the idea of time, and then source consciousness, which is all, that is the brain, that is bringing all of this to experience through dreaming it, through calling it into action, all that kind of stuff.
Yes. Okay. So since we've gotten pretty deep into our conversation, maybe we can get into something a little bit deeper. If anyone has been listening this whole time, a question that arises, that is, like you said, when it comes to meditation, realizing you're an energy body, disassociating with your physical body, is there some kind of dimension that is associated with that? I think I've heard you talk about 5D, fourth dimension, fifth dimension. Is there any kind of understanding of dimensions that you have?
So when people start calling dimensions, they want to, as quickly as possible, let their inner mental computer start to form pictures or spreadsheets or like chart graphs of what's being described. And moving into those places and into the energetic and higher consciousness planes, as you start letting go of what it means to look through 2 human sets of eyes and feel through 5 physical senses and speak a human language. Like, why is science saying plants can communicate? They certainly aren't speaking like French or
Or English.
or Afrikaans or any. They're not speaking, right? Like, they're knowing. They're communicating via knowing. So meditating is getting silent enough to get to that place where you begin to perceive and know things that are too big for human language. And as you get more comfortable doing that, you can hold that knowing in such a way where you can come back and try to let it come out in a way that can possibly make sense to somebody who's trying to like figure out a way to get some texture so they can hold on to it. And this also becomes tricky because, again, you've got to give milk to the babies, meat to the men. Like, you've got to figure out how to let it come, not figure out, but just, let it come out in a way where it can be understood at everybody
A
level.
level that they're ready for.
Yeah, and at a level where people are like, no, I've done that. I get that. Now, what's this last thing I'm not getting? It's right at the surface, and I feel like there's something that I need to click. And that's like the Gospel of Thomas. Jesus said, who do people say I am? And they're like, some say you're John the Baptist, or you're this or you're that. And he's like, but who do you say I am? And Thomas said, well, you're literally him. You're the Son of God. And he's like, okay, cool. You and me, let's go talk. So of all the people, there's a few disciples. Of all the disciples, like really only one got this.
Got it.
So he took him aside. It says he gave him 3 words. And then Thomas came down and the other disciples said, hey, what did he tell you? And he's like, he told me 3 things. And of one of them, if I tell it to you, you will surely stone me right now. So we have to infer later what almost got Jesus stoned, which was saying, I'm God. And he said, you're gods, because he quoted a Bible verse where God said, you're gods, lowercase g, but you'll die like men. We're in a carbon-based body. From dust we come, to dust we return. We are the breath of God that's animating us, right? So the body's here for a while, but also we are eternal. We are right now, that part of ourselves is seated safely in eternity right now. And God said that and almost got stoned. So that's what he told Thomas, who was willing to accept that you are the Son of God. And then he's like, hey, listen, so are you, bro. You can't tell everybody yet, because even our friends might freak out and stone us for saying this until they get ready to know it more. So getting into that place, exiting yourself as your human confines, and being willing to accept the truth, not going out into spiritual delirium, not being in such a rush to find the truth that you become like a drug addict or go abandon your family and like all your responsibilities and go live out under a tree in the woods. You know what I mean? You may do that. Some people may feel called to do that, but possibly doing that out of a sense of anxiety or a sense of need or rush is just the ego messing with your timeline a little bit, because you're trying to rush divinity on your schedule rather than just sit tight and say, thy will be done, not mine. Because whatever downloads we get, whatever divine inspirations and revelations we get, we're only going to get the one at a time until it fully integrates into our being. Once it goes past our knowing, where we're analyzing it and we're questioning it and we're looking for validation of it out in the world, like, okay, I think I got this idea. Let me go see if it's true by confirming somewhere else. Okay, good. So this has been said 1,000 years ago, so that means it's true, right? Once you're done with that, it's fully part of you. then and only then can we get the next thing. But as soon as something's still at the intellectual level, we touched God, gave us a little something. A lot of times we feel disconnected and we get in a hurry to then go try to reconnect on our schedule. And that leads to all sorts of potentially unhealthy behaviors.
Wow. Yes. Yes. I've had so many of those moments that I call epiphanies,
Yeah.
and it's a download of information. And people ask if I meditate, and I tell them I usually meditate in the shower. Like that's my place where I get downloads almost every morning. I'm just because you're in a place where you're not thinking about what you're doing,
Yeah.
and so your mind can wander. And when my mind is free, I've had the downloads of information that feel like they come from somewhere else. And you're right. Like once you get out of the shower and you go like, wait a second, is this real? You know, the whole intellectualization.
Yeah.
Go into the scripture, find out if they said it before, find out what other people think of it, until it's sunken into, you know, your heart and your gut,
Yeah.
into your being. Then you have that knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the knowing is important. And you know, a lot of people will say like, do you believe? You know, do you believe? That's such a big question. Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in God? And now my answer has always become like, what do you know? It's more important what you know, because belief has this idea of you're not sure. Like if you believe something, it doesn't sound like you know it. Knowing it has more of a power.
Yeah. That's the final sentence of my book. So this is book 1 in a series, but again, I needed to break it up for a number of reasons, but it's a series of alignments. And then the chapter 7 is moving through a practice that can assist in pulling you into Christ consciousness very firmly and quickly. And the final 2 sentences are, you are anointed, you know. Like this, mastering this process pulls you back into a remembrance. You are anointed, you know. And then from
one of
there,
the questions I wrote down was that, do you have a spiritual practice?
existing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense on a deeper level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything is part of the practice.
100%.
Showering, getting up, brushing your teeth.
I'm
That's a
happy you.
huge part
I'm
of the
happy you
practice.
said showering. Like same. Like in the shower, if I'm in a shower where I'm like not in a hurry, right? But sometimes I can take a minute to stand under the water.
Yeah.
I get great stuff. And then when I'm driving, when I take like road trips,
Oh, driving. Me too.
yeah, I don't know, like, you know, that wouldn't sound great on a poster if I was trying to sell a retreat and make, you know, be a spiritual gatekeeper. You see that in the spiritual community, the same as in the church, right? Look,
You don't have to pay it. You don't have to pay $1,000. You could just go for a long drive.
I'm not like, I plan to do retreats and be a part of events and be a part of community for the fun of it, right? But like people that are like making it sound like this is you know what I mean? Like, unless you are aware that this is for fun, but it's just as equal as this, right? Like, same thing. I don't recall any parts in the Bible or any other of the religious holy texts I've read that say, now it's time for you to go to Costa Rica and take an ayahuasca trip for 5 days at a resort, right? Like that can be fun, but that's not a prerequisite. Just be here right now. Like God, first of all, the spiritual alarm clock will go off when it's supposed to. God's going to come get you whether you are asking for it or not, if it's time. And likewise, just because you want to doesn't necessarily mean you can make that next epiphany happen, but being open to it at all times, like being meditation in motion, being the prayer, existing, is the highest spiritual thing. Like the Buddhists say, you're still going to have to carry water and chop wood, right? Like, so just do your life, but it becomes a thing where you're like, dude, I get to do life. This is fantastic. I'm here playing in a body, like I'm a human being. I can feel all these things and emotions and go through all this stuff. I'm not just back up in the ether, like looking at everything. I'm down here in it right now. I'm in the game. You know what I mean?
The game. I was going to say that. Yeah. Because you said play. I'm here playing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think when we talk about the zone, it feels like playing.
Yeah.
When you're playing a sport or you're playing music, it's that same word over and over again. We're playing.
Yes.
And you can be driving, or you could be talking to friends, and it can be as fun as playing a game
Yeah.
if you do realize your freedom. And again, the idea of the game, Nick Zai's universe, the game.
Hmm.
Um, I don't. The thing that I don't like about it is it sounds trivial. Like, oh yeah, this universe is just a game.
Right.
It's more real than
Uh-huh.
a video game. But I get it. It's the idea that we're here to play,
Yeah.
and it's something that we have a lot more control over than we thought.
Total control, as a matter of fact. You're just not able to recode the entire game while you're in the avatar playing it, but you are holding the controls.
Yeah, total control, and yet you're not able to recode it. That's the thing. I think a lot about how much control we have over our lives,
Hmm.
and how some people seem to have more control, and some people are in a victim mentality.
We've gone on a long time, but this will be a good one. People at an individual level are one thing. People that become icons, like celebrities or political figures, or like a bad guy like Hitler or somebody like that. Anybody that is an icon, this circles back to the concept that anything you see in the world is a mirror reflection of your inner state. And people who become icons and big celebrities or have big attention around them, these are expressions of the collective subconscious that has been desiring for such a thing to exist, because they can't or won't do it in their own private individual lives. But there are enough people who have this secret, unspoken shadow fantasy about whatever it is, whether it's this hedonistic playboy lifestyle, whether it's this revenge lifestyle, whether it's this
John
victory
Wick.
and yeah,
Yeah,
like
we
this.
all want to be John Wick a little
Yeah.
bit.
This, a power for a struggle for power, political, they're wrong and I'm right and I need to change, be the lawmaker or do the, so celebrities, right? Like they're performing and they have all this attention, blah, blah, blah. So that is an expression of a collective subconscious. Because when you really look at anybody, when you sort of take them out of the limelight and off the pedestal and stack them next against any other human being, like everybody who eats a meal at some point today or tomorrow is going to have to go let that meal out in the toilet, right? Like,
Yes,
so
yeah. We're
like
human.
we're all on the same level foot. There are different levels of talent, and we look at that and attribute that a lot of times with that person. But really, there's tremendous talent. Like, you know what I mean? You're in a band. You probably see this a lot. Like, there's tremendously talented people who you probably know who are, from an objective standpoint, way better than a lot of people who are famous, right?
Yes.
Like why, how, and we can attribute that to luck or this or that or industry insiders or whatever. But the reality is, it's just that the collective subconscious, just like at Jesus's time, the collective subconscious was ready. There was enough people to say, you know what, something about the religious order of things is lacking. It's confining and it's not right anymore. So they were able to receive Christ, which is why when Elisha was around 1,000 years before and he was raising people from the dead and performing miracles, he didn't garner the same type of following as Jesus did, partly because Jesus was the anointed one at the right time and right place and right circumstances to do that, and also because John the Baptist had came right before him to clear the way by starting to get people who were willing to accept stepping outside of the social norms and the religious bounds of the time, and had a bigger pocket of an open mind that was willing to accept Jesus to the point where he could then create such a massive impact that would last forever. So that is what icons are. They are a reflection of the collective subconscious of people who have not yet begun to realize that everything is a mirror of their own inner energetics.
That's it. Yeah, I think we've gone on for almost 2 hours. I could go on for another hour, but I'll be respectful of your time. And I thank you so much for joining me today. It's like definitely eye-opening to me. Like I said, I had a couple aha moments during the last couple hours. So thanks for coming on, and hope to have another chat with you in the future.
Thank you. Anytime. Thank you so much.
All right.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.